Well,
Um, it's 11 a.m., Dr. Mike, so we can start. Do you want to introduce yourself and then we can go ahead with your presentation?
yeah, so let me just kind of hit hit the right buttons and go to the right places here.
Yep.
I am Dr. Michael Sheldon, and I am a professor in information and operations management here in Mays Business School, where I'm located. And I've been at Texas A&M for about 5.5 years now, and I bring a lot of the kind of human and design side of things into my field, which tends to kind of be a little more technical in nature to some extent, but really we serve as kind of a bridge between business and the technology side of organizations. So can everyone see my title slide well here?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to begin by asking the question of to the crowd here, besides Kelly, because I know she knows the answer to this. But when you hear of information systems, what do you think of? Not everyone at once. So I guess I should have made it clear that that was a question to the crowd. But a lot of people just think of the computers and sort of the technical stuff. And an information system is by nature, yes, the information technology that is the physical computing devices, software, but also data and business processes, that is people and what they're trying to do with that information technology. So the foundational concept in information systems is around the system development lifecycle, which is a set of phases where business analysts study the interactions between people and processes and technologies to design and align IT solutions that are going to meet organizational goals. So the system development lifecycle has a number of different phases and activities in it, which again are oriented toward ensuring we have the right information technology for what folks are doing in business. However, quite commonly, the folks that help to get the components of an information system together are often technology enthusiasts. And so they develop solutions that are based on their own perspectives rather than sort of focusing on providing users with some sort of optimal IT so that they can achieve their job objectives efficiently and effectively. In other words, we tend to, in information systems, over designed for ourselves. That is, we get information technology solutions for businesses, but the folks developing the systems are creating solutions that are, from their perspective, what's going to work for the business without really kind of getting into that sense of understanding who their end users are. And that's a key reason why many systems are so unsuccessful or moderately successful. So there is a parallel type of process that is not very well practiced in my field, but it's called human-centered design. And this is a way of bringing empathy into creating any sort of artifacts or systems for people to use. And it's a way of basically ensuring that we're stepping out of that self-design um, zone, which a lot of folks in information systems tend to fall into. And that's the focus of my course that I've chosen for this project of integrating AI, and it's called Information Systems Design and Development Project. And what we try to do is use a set of techniques and activities to basically remind folks that they are not their end users, that we're developing systems for other people. It's high on empathy. And so, in the rest of this presentation, I'm going to tell you about some of the techniques very briefly in human centered design, how I'm trying to use and teach students very human, empathetic types of techniques, but also integrate artificial intelligence where I can. I have a couple of brief examples, and then we will open things up for our discussion. One of the big takeaways, though, is I think that sort of as we recognize, and as I try to get my students to recognize in information systems, that they're developing IT essentially for end users in their business tasks. They are not their users, but similarly, we are not our students. And so that's kind of a meta takeaway, if you will. So in human-centered design, there are a set of phases, and each phase has multiple techniques that help us to ensure that we're getting of our own shoes and getting into someone else's shoes as we're designing information system solutions. So I have a collection of activities here. Certainly, we don't have the time and the space to kind of talk about all of them, but as you can kind of read the different techniques, you can see that there's a number of different actual kind of hands-on things that we're doing, and being very careful throughout the process to challenge our assumptions, to uh, interact with the folks that we are building systems for throughout collecting data from them, interviewing them, faithfully representing them throughout the process as we can, and ultimately coming back and testing our solutions out with the people that we're developing for so they can give us feedback so that we can further refine them to make sure that we're actually kind of designing solutions that address their needs and make sense to them and are actually usable by them. So this is a breakdown, not of all the tasks that we do in human-centered design, but ones that I focus on in the course that I'm teaching. It is a graduate course. And I thought a lot about how I can use artificial generative AI for the most part to help complement some of these activities, but recognizing that humans are the ones that bring the empathy and need to consistently remind themselves that they're not the people they're developing these solutions for. So finding ways to integrate AI really was challenging for me when I thought about kind of taking this on. And just as kind of my tentative roadmap, I looked at ways in which perhaps AI could help with some of the analytical work, which then combined with the students also being a part of the process, hopefully would not take away that empathy that we're trying to cultivate throughout the entirety of the process. So at this point in the semester, I've only really gotten through about the first three of the techniques that you see up here. And just for a sense of orientation, um, that so far in the semester, we've done some of the activities around empathizing with other people. We've collected some data. We started to analyze that data and then create what are called user personas and user journey maps, which sort of are a way of trying to summarize faithfully the experiences, the personality, sort of characteristics, and the sorts of goals and pain points that users tend are facing in a problem area. So what I've had my students do with this so far is create an interview protocol, go out and interview other people around some sort of experience that they've had. And just as a rooting concept, I've used the Aggie core values for this. That is, I had my students pick an Aggie core value and then go out around Texas A&M and interview them about their experiences with that core value to sort of get a sense as to what students, either saw as opportunities around that core value or potentially where they're experiencing pain points or apathy in actually expressing those core values. And by the end of the semester, the students are going to develop some sort of website or application to help the folks on Texas A&M, the folks on campus, to be able to either practice or better embody those core values. Now, where we are so far is, again, collecting some data, analyzing that data, and then trying to create a picture of, or multiple pictures of how folks feel about the core values on campus. Now, that's kind of getting into the weeds of where they are, and they're still working on this, but I'll kind of give you some examples of the techniques and how AI is fitting in there from kind of a completely separate example that mirrors what we're doing in the classroom. So I think most folks here probably, get that in an interview, we're having a dialogue with other people. We have questions to ask, they have responses. And then to analyze that data from different individuals, we can use something called an affinity diagram. And so, what that looks like is if we were developing something along the lines of an application for folks to eat better or to have an improved diet, we might collect data on things like their food preferences, where they find recipes, et cetera, et cetera. And for each participant, we break these up into chunks, and then we sort those chunks into common themes. So, for example, I already mentioned some of these: food preference, frequency, and source. And from this, try to derive commonalities that we can apply that faithfully represent the folks that we're going to develop this application for. So, for example, I like certain foods. That is, people have preferences. I find recipes from many different places. I cook regularly. So I'm encouraging students to kind of like this, find themes in the interviews that they have conducted. Now, in the book that we're using, the author provides an example of an interview protocol he developed in designing a travel application for folks who are interested in traveling by themselves, taking vacations by themselves, and so on. On his website, he provides a sample of data that is chunked by participant, like we saw earlier. And what I've had the students do to kind of get a sense as to how to analyze the interview data is to essentially take this kind of pre-formatted data from our textbook author, and then the students themselves are going to sort that, or have been sorting that, into themes as one of their assignments here. And from that, developing a persona of that theme, which is a fictitious person, but is meant to kind of represent and embody all of those themes, an archetype, or as we call them, personas. And ultimately, using that interview data as well and those themes, we kind of create a journey of that person's typical experience with traveling alone, just as my students are going to do with a student's experience with one or more of the core values over some length of time that we're kind of still negotiating as a class. So what for one of the assignments I've had the students do is that they did kind of this initial analysis of sorting out the affinity map that is identifying categories. And then I asked them to have an AI also do that, so that maybe they could see where there were some other commonalities that they missed. And ultimately, they brought the empathy, and then the AI brought to that kind of its less empathetic way of analyzing the data. So just as an example, and there's a lot here I know to try to read on the screen or to describe, but you can kind of see one group's initial attempt to sort that sample interview data. And they've identified a number of different themes, such as I want to meet new people, I'm worried about transportation, I travel spontaneously. And then they had Chat GPT, and I told the students they could use any generative AI that they wanted to do this, which sorted things again into categories. Now, what I noticed about this is the students, without even kind of saying this, they brought the empathy. They made all of these I statements. I travel spontaneously. I do research when I travel. Whereas the generative AI has just named the categories, such as planning and research, navigation and transportation. Another group came up with their own set of categories, and no two groups were going to be exactly the same. I value maps. I like to meet others. How I feel about hotels. Not all I statements, but for the most part, those were I statements. And again, the AI kind of also created categories, but there's really only one I statement there. And so we can kind of see that same pattern between those. This group also, and I think what this group did was a little bit different from the other two that we saw. They broke them up into those I statements, and then they had the generative AI break those up into kind of even smaller segments to kind of flush out more specificity and detail into themes that they already identified. From this, I then had the students create, and this is using both their affinity maps and the AI generated affinity maps to create personas. And so they created these personas in class in about an hour from the categories they derived from there, plus the AI data to kind of present these profiles where we have their goals and frustrations. And ultimately, if we were doing this for real, we would try to develop an application that fits along with their personality and aligns with their goal and reduces their primary frustrations. So as we look at these, you can see that the students represented these personas in a number of different ways. None of this was based on using AI to generate the personas, but again, they generated these personas in teams based on both their results and the AI results. Now, what I thought was interesting as I looked through these, and some of them they just kind of pulled templates as I'm kind of emphasizing here, with some of them looking very similar. But they generated these again, kind of capturing these archetypes of folks to have them in mind as they're developing these applications. Now, what I didn't emphasize as I was doing this is I still saw a lot of self-design creeping in as they were designing these personas. So nothing in the data said anything about the participants being from Texas, but about 35 to 40% of the personas the students created were magically from Texas, just like they are. And my students are in a business school, and about 50% of the personas that they developed were very businessy. They were in marketing or finance or tech consulting. So the students were still kind of, without knowing it, bringing in these own self biases into these personas that they were creating, knowing that these personas were meant to be a way to try to get them to escape from their kind of own narrow lens of that self designed trap. So I very quickly covered some techniques here in human centered design. Wanted to emphasize that humans, in developing really any kind of artifact, including the information technology in an information system, they employ empathy. From what I found so far is that AI can support the humans, but AI probably can't really do a whole lot from an empathetic perspective, at least as of yet. But together, those have the potential to continue to reduce self-design. And my big takeaway from at least the few activities I've done in class so far, and I still have a lot to explore with more activities going on going forward, is that AI is never going to be the human. However, I think it's worth exploring the ways in which they can complement one another and sort of take this human-centered design into maybe a brave new world of artificial and human intelligence-centered design. So with that, I am at the end of my 15-ish minute presentation. I want to open things up for discussion. In order to do that, I also thought it might be helpful to just kind of, since I'm sure a lot of the discussion will be focused on these human techniques and ways in which I think AI might be able to support that. Here's just kind of a repurposing of that slide from earlier. So I don't know what protocol usually is for discussion, but I guess I'm just gonna say if you have a question or you want to pose a thought, now is a good time to do that.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Mike. That was awesome. And yes, we welcome any questions or comments at this point.
Dr. Mike, I see you use additional analysis, additional summary, additional ideation, which
Yes.
makes perfect sense. Did you find, well, you're only on step two, but have you found that the students on occasion decide that it's not additional, that they're just going to try the analysis or the summary or the ideation without doing it on their own? They're going to
Uh,
try
and,
AI?
yeah, and that's something I think I've been worried about not just in this class, but a lot of the classes I teach are really focused on um, kind of collecting data, analyzing that data, and developing data-driven solutions and bringing your own sort of design expertise and your own critical thinking skills in order to be able to do that. So I've very intentionally so far with these activities posted kind of first the usual instruction I would have given, which is you do it yourself, and then it created a sequel exercise where the students are basically doing the same thing but trying to, I guess, cheat on the assignment in some ways. Like just take AI, go crazy with it, but show me what you did, how you did it, and what your findings were. Let's talk about it, and then see ways in which maybe there were some blind spots that you had, or ways in which you further make sense of what the artificial intelligence has generated for you. I'm not super comfortable just kind of letting them ride without those heavy sets of training wheels on there, but I'm kind of learning to try to let go a little bit. And I think all of us are still in this space where we're navigating, um, what is acceptable in the sense that the students still develop those critical thinking and analytical skills, but you know, they're literally, or I guess maybe not literally, but to some extent they're having those skills um, reinforced or what have you by using artificial intelligence. So I guess I trip over my own words because I'm still really struggling with it a lot. Just one piece I think is kind of worth noting in here is that in one of my undergraduate classes where they're for the first time really starting to analyze a business case and come up with solutions. I say to them that AI can perhaps be a valuable assistant in the workplace, where, for example, your boss asks you to summarize a whole bunch of findings from some research. Artificial intelligence might help you to do that. So you can give a report to your boss, who's then going to make a decision on the output of that summary. Whereas when I ask you to summarize and analyze data and provide me with that output, it's not because I'm going to make a decision with it. It's because I want to assess the extent to which you've developed your critical thinking and your analytical skills. So it's like really confusing because they're kind of getting practice with the things they'll do in business, but the output is being used for very very different reasons. So walking that line is really challenging.
Thank you. And by the way, we say process versus product. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. But because the output of a process is often a product,
absolutely.
for it's just really hard to, especially because our students don't have that frame of reference of having been in professional work environment to kind of understand that there isn't always just one answer. There isn't the right way to do things all the time. And they kind of see AI, at least from what I've learned so far, is that AI is going to get the right answer when in fact, it's a process. It's not, no two outputs are ever going to be the same, even though the process is the same.
So Dr. Mike, I'm curious, I don't know if maybe you'd already answered this or not. Do you like teach the students how to use the AI at all, or you just sort of let them go through that?
I I honestly don't think I'm at that point where I even know the right prompts or even the best tools to use. And to some extent, I feel like we're in such a nascent stage of generative AI where it feels a little bit like a moot point to have students learn how to use one particular tool to do a task because they're evolving so quickly and changing. Prompt engineering even, seems to be changing from um, month to month in terms of specificity and ways you can ask it to take a perspective to respond to something. And I think the best approach here right now is not necessarily to focus on any tool and how to use it best, but rather to kind of open it up as a playground so that they're learning and they actually kind of have to critically think about, which tools am I selecting and why, and look at the output and determine whether or not this output is appropriate. I feel like that's far more powerful because in the future, we don't know what tools are going to be available to choose from. If we assume there's just kind of a broad array of tools, well, now the students are maybe one leg up in thinking through critically how to evaluate those tools on top of how to use those tools. And, that trial and error often leads to some of the strongest learning outcomes. Um, and I'm going to take a lot of notes away from, their being I'm going to have a lot of takeaways by allowing them to have a very wide open playground. So I can maybe advise the next group, here's some general things to think about when choosing which sort of tools to use. I feel like I have a very hands-off sort of AI approach where I'm saying you can use it. I'm going to put guidelines around it and try to design the activities so they're very intentional that you're getting some practice and then you're weaving in some artificial intelligence. But when it comes to actually, choosing those tools or how you use those, I'm stepping back. And I don't know if that's the best thing to do or not, but I really have the sense that at this moment in time and where we are with this space of everybody appropriating AI for seemingly everything, that it's it's it might actually fuel more creativity that way. Are there any activities on here that you want me to explain more or kind of share with you my thoughts about how I might integrate AI with them?
I
I
don't
would
want.
like to know about the second one. Go ahead, Keegan.
Oh no,
Sorry.
I didn't want to dominate the conversation, so that's why I'm taking a little break here. I just wanted to follow up on the evaluative piece that you were talking about, Dr. Mike, because of um, right now I'm working through this sort of with some of my students in terms of like how do we evaluate those outputs? Because what I've seen in research is that as sort of experts, content experts, faculty know, what it's supposed to come out on the other side, right? And they understand the value of like, I need to be able to analyze that by virtue of knowing it, so I know whether what I'm getting is valuable or not. Students who haven't yet mastered that base knowledge don't think that that content expertise is as necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering like how you sort of teach them to evaluate what the AI is giving them into whether it is actually valid or useful.
So I honestly, and I'm a straight shooter. I don't think I'm there yet. And I don't think they're necessarily there yet, but I, I give a lot of feedback in this course. So this used to be a course, it used to be a required course, and it was kind of a nightmare for me. I'd inherited from someone who was essentially teaching, another version of, learning some new technology tools and kind of doing things the way we've always been doing it. But we're going to throw in a little bit of um, design theory and such so that the output is a little more creative. I had inherited the course and really wanted to bring empathy to the forefront of everything the students were doing, again, to reduce self-design, to try to not eliminate, but reduce bias as much as possible in a process that's been recognized to be, kind of relatively biased by nature. So I brought all this stuff in, completely redesigned the course, and it was a required course with 3 sections, 40 students in each section, and I was teaching 120 students. And having them in groups kind of go through this very human process, um, it's kind of a nightmare because just the amount of time it took to give really good and meaningful feedback on the sorts of things they were doing, because a lot of that feedback was trying to provide them with guidance about where they were maybe making assumptions, where perhaps they could have had interview questions that were less biased, how they could evaluate a piece of software or a website that they created through the lens of someone else and not just themselves. There's just a lot of the students, benefit the most and kind of get the most out of the process when they're able to get very detailed and immediate feedback from the professor. And I just wasn't cutting it. So, talking with our program director, we made this an elective course. I now have about 23 students in it. So I'm able to give a lot more of that direct feedback. So as they're sort of doing the human side of things, I'm giving them a lot of feedback on that. And now they're starting to integrate artificial intelligence. And I think as we go through the process, a key component of many of their group deliverables where they're working together on a team, I'm going to be able to I'm going to be asking them about their reflections on using AI as either part of the human activities they're doing or um, how they view the AI output after they have done that as a human activity. And that's really kind of my assessment, is their reflections showing me some of their work. They don't have to show all of the work, but showing some of the work. And I'm pretty certain that when I do this again next time, and I teach this class once a year, I'll probably have a much better breakdown of, the sorts of activities and where AI is going to be appropriate, but also a better idea as to how to, assess and evaluate their output based on that.
As a follow-up to that question, what's the feedback you're getting from students so far on using AI as part of the project?
Um, with with the affinity mapping, which is the big one that we've done so far, um, the students found it really hard to take the data that I gave them, and it probably has to do with the format of that data, and to put that into AI and then have AI give them an output that looks like the output they would have been able to produce by themselves. So I gave them the data on a giant PowerPoint slide in little blocks. And that's because the technique of affinity mapping was originally designed to have sticky notes on a wall, and then you can rearrange them and easily categorize that data. So it was cumbersome. One student told me that they basically put all the data into a table, and the AI that they were using could not recognize data when it was in a table, despite the fact that the AI claimed to be able to analyze data that was in a table. The output, the examples I showed, I kind of showed for convenience sake because they were in a very similar format. couple of the student groups got their output and it was in more of a narrative form or bullet point form, or even, oddly enough, output that then was in table form. So, and the students were allowed to use, whatever tool they wanted. Some used ChatGPT, some used Copilot, some used whatever the Google name is now. Um, so it was a wide array of output, and then putting that back into an acceptable format, very cumbersome. In terms of the results, the students kind of felt like it was on par with what they identified. I didn't have any group that was like, aha, this was far more brilliant than what we came up with. So I don't quite know what to take away from that yet, but I really feel that as they get more touch points with AI, that's when you'll start to see themes in what's working well and what's not, in their experience.
What about the bigger picture? What did they think about just using AI in general in your class?
To me, it's like a really big deal because I've been trying to keep folks, and for the last 2 years, it's been no AI, period, end of sentence. If you want to use AI for something, please come to me and we'll set up some firm guidelines around it because I really want you to get the human experience. And they just kind of seem to be like, all right, we get to use another tool in this class. Cool. And to me, it was like liberation for the masses. And to them, it was like, I thought we were already free. So, and I think it's because you're seeing very similar attitudes in other classes. Professors are starting to be like, hey, let's figure this out together. So they're not really wowed or excited about it. Plus, they don't have the experience of having gone through the process I'm teaching them in this class without using AI. So I'm just not sure how to really give a good answer to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Mike, I was just
Yeah.
wondering, like, in the prototyping in this slide, you have a question mark after generative prototyping. Why is that?
So that's an area that, as we get closer to that, and that's probably going to be coming in about, wow, we're moving fast through the semester. That's probably going to be coming in about week 9 or 10.
Okay.
They're claimed to be tools. I haven't played too much with them yet. That essentially allow you to input a number of requirements and it outputs a prototype for you. Versus typical prototyping tools where you have the humans outlining where things are going to be on a screen, which buttons kind of do what. A prototype by nature, and at least in the scope of this class, isn't going to be something that's fully functional and does all the things. It's meant to be kind of a rough proof of concept, but I want to see that the students are able to articulate how their proof of concept is consistent with the needs and the problems of the folks that they're developing this for. So I'm not really sure how I feel yet about the students kind of, maybe feeding a generative AI a few different user personas and then saying, create me a tool that meets their needs. I want to try it just to kind of see what the output is. But I'm just not sure kind of what that prototype output would look like, how suitable it would be. So the question mark is there because that's really one of the things I am most ambiguous about in what I'm doing with the class.
For sharing, Dr. Mike. I would like to take a step back and I wanted to ask you, I am totally with you when we use like post-it notes to make like affinity groups and it becomes really cumbersome and it takes a lot of time. But generative AI is not that much of a help either. So how do you like strike a balance between that, or like how do you perceive that? Like
So
if
how
it's
do I
not that, I'm not sure if I was clear. Like if it's not that helpful, yeah, then
Yeah.
should we keep using it?
Absolutely. So, kind of it's early in the game because I've had the students kind of go through this practice one time where I kind of gave them an artificial set of data that came from the author of our textbook, and then said, try sorting this on your own, then try having an AI sort it. And the results felt very similar. So, in that, if I was going to award points for human or artificial intelligence, I'd kind of call that a draw, with maybe the exception about the category names, because AI was not very empathetic in that regard. Their next step is, and what they're actually working on pretty much as we speak, is creating an affinity map based on interview data that they wrote an interview protocol. They've gone out and conducted interviews now. They have to break that up and then go through affinity mapping for that. Now, I'm very curious if with this more organic set of data, if their analysis is going to match as well with the AI analysis and vice versa. Ultimately, if it does, I think next time I do this, I might start with the AI analysis and ask them to kind of fine tune it in the end. I'm a little uncomfortable to do that so early.
Sense.
But yeah, that's kind of how I'm negotiating that, open space at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question.
Any other question from the audience or comment?
What was the name of the textbook you were using?
It's called The Art and Science of User Experience Design. It's by a man named Anthony Conta. And it's one of the best books I've ever seen in using human-centered design for the purposes of developing information artifacts. Yep.
We have 3 minutes left. So any final thoughts? Any final comments?
So I sort of had a follow-up here.
Yeah.
Thinking about what you were saying in terms of the difficulty in providing detailed feedback to large numbers of students, right?
Yeah.
Have you looked at any way that students could use the AI on their own to begin receiving that feedback? So like, for example, like what I do when I'm writing is I will put my draft into the AI and I will say, give me constructive criticism on this rough draft. Don't regenerate it for me.
Right.
I'm not looking for you to create something, but basically be like a 24/7 hands-on writing coach.
And so on that note, there are good ways that I'm familiar with to have artificial intelligence essentially be a copy editor for you, and maybe a writing coach. The sorts of artifacts the students are producing in terms of reports, as well as, for example, an affinity map is something that I grade. Their personas are something that I grade. And as we go through this and they actually start to develop like prototypes and then do testing on it, they're submitting their results. They're also creating reports that explain, the techniques that they've been using and how they've applied those techniques and ultimately how they've created these artifacts. So I'm not sure how I could have an AI kind of give constructive feedback, for example, on the extent to which their affinity diagram is biased, or that, their personas are not faithfully being, are not a faithful representation of the folks they went out and got data about their experience from. I'm not sure how AI could, assess a prototype to ensure that again, it's something that's going to actually be useful and usable to the people that they developed it for. Now, the students are meant to write about how their prototype aligns with these things, but I don't know how the AI can kind of give that critical feedback to them, or if it can.
So something I'm just kind of thinking about spitballing here, just try to give you an idea. It might be interesting to write like a long form prompt for generative AI that turns it into something like, say, an artificial boss. And then they submit their project to the boss, and the boss says, all right, based on this project, here's the decisions that I would make. And then they can see like, oh, okay, so based on me submitting this, this is what the boss is seeing, learning, using, and here's what they would do. Because I got a lot of really good engagement from my students, having them use the AI as a storyteller for an ethical scenario that they had to navigate. Because generically, when we ask them to think about ethics, they go, oh, somebody would ask me to do this unethical thing, and I would, of course, do the right thing because I'm a good person, and then everything would work out great for me, right? Which we all know is exactly how things work in life, and that's why we all make good decisions all the time.
Exactly.
And so I was like, all right, as an AI, make this as realistic and detailed as possible. Make it very challenging. There's no single right answer, right? Like, it is ambiguous. And there are consequences for any decision you make. And they just loved it. Like, they were like, this actually is my favorite assignment we've done all year.
Okay. Well, I feel like that might be similar to some of the other techniques that I have coming up. They're supposed to try to basically tell a story about their persona in a few different ways and their experience. So that idea of storytelling might be helpful. I'm in the nascent stages of playing with bots in another class for simulating stakeholders in a business setting. Quite frankly, it's so challenging because I kind of love playing with new tools, but you have to be so intentional and careful with what we're doing, not to mention all the time that adds to what we're ordinarily doing. So I'm not sure how to quite get there yet, but it's baby steps.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Mike. We are kind of towards the end of our session, so thank you for your presentation. It was awesome. Thank you. Thank you
appreciate
everyone
that very
for
much.
joining us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. And I see something in the chat here. I am in some sort of weird Zoom hell at the moment, and I don't. There we go. Stop sharing my screen. I just want to see the chat. Okay.
Everyone is thanking you.
Okay. And if anybody wants to chat, I'm just putting my email in here. All right. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you around the old AI bar at some point.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.